All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Exquisite Love Coaching channel. Today, we have our esteemed guest, Mike Thomas, who's an everyday consciousness coach. And what that means, for, in the ways that he's explained it to me, is that he's developing practices that can be used every day by everyone, and those practices, because they can be used every day by everyone, allows us to connect more easily with each other. It's much easier for us to connect with each other when we have similar practices, when we have similar ways of looking at the world. And beyond that, independently of our individual experiences, we can still relate to each other. I think that's really key and really important. And today, our topic of conversation is going to be integration, the path to wellness. And so, Mike, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit more about you, or about what you like to geek out on.
Thank you very much for having me, Philippe. So everyday consciousness coaching is about, as you said, connecting to how every person, no matter what their challenges are, no matter what their strengths are, can connect to themselves better and connects to other people better through the human experience. And that's the basis of the tools that I teach. It includes embodied breathing, awareness of sensation, and then it moves up from there to more and more complexity, depending on what you need specifically.
All right, beautiful. So tell us some more about integration and how that plays into like a vital role into what you teach.
So integration, as Dr. Dan Siegel defines it, is the linkage of differentiated parts. And I'd like to take a moment to invite everyone to join me in this short exercise to feel what that means, to embody integration. So just notice one hand. You can hold one hand up if you'd like and take a look at it, and go ahead and take note. Which hand is it? Is it the right or the left? Whichever hand it is, go ahead and look at it, wiggle the thumb, feel it, see it. You might even hear it if you were to tap it on another finger and tap and move the index finger. You may notice that you're breathing or you stopped breathing. Notice the middle finger, the ring finger, and the pinky finger. And now go ahead and make a fist. And then open it nice and wide, noticing all the sensations, seeing that hand, feeling that hand, maybe even hearing that hand, smelling that hand, tasting that hand even if you'd like, and connecting to the five senses. There's many different ways of experiencing a hand and all the differentiated parts. Now, if you were to grab onto something, let's say a glass of water, you're using all of those differentiated parts and you're linking them in a coherent way, in a way that allows you to use it. If I had an overly rigid hand, I might not be able to differentiate the parts. It might just be I'm pushing on the glass and it's not able to grasp, or maybe I can't control the muscles because I'm having a spasm of some sort, and so I can move all these different parts, but I can't keep it in a coherent way. Silly example, but it does happen for certain people, so it's not silly for some people. And the idea is that this applies to the whole human experience. So not just physically with your hand, but with the different parts of the brain, with the different parts of the body, and between different people that are differentiated and linked. And so integration allows coherence within the individual as well as in relationships. So that's integration as an embodied experience with your hand, linkage of differentiated parts, and they work coherently, as opposed to when it's not coherent, you end up with either chaos or rigidity.
So what about inner parts, in the sense of, okay, there's a part of me that wants this and there's a part of me that doesn't want that, or there's a part of me that feels really young and crying. So does this fit into the model you just gave us?
Oh, absolutely. So this is probably a good segue into what I call the 7 layers of human consciousness. They correlate to levels of development, but it's a very loose model that allows us to see the different aspects of our human experience. And the one that you just mentioned would be what I'd call the 2nd layer. 2nd layer being psychological, and the developmental stage it corresponds to is up to 7 years of age, where we have what's called imprinting and learn about how the world is. And it's essentially our beliefs, our values, our psychology, our top-down models, that is how we view the world, how we filter our experience, is uniquely created. And so the different parts that you mentioned that we could differentiate and link. Well, I have a part of me that loves to skateboard. I have a part of me that loves to sleep, and I could sleep for 15 hours if I had the time. And those are very different parts. But if I honor that part that wants to sleep and get enough sleep so that my body feels healthy, then that part that wants to get excited and try new challenging and sometimes uncertain things on a skateboard, well, I'm better able to do that because they're differentiated but coherently linked. That would be the parts in the psychological layer.
So, and there could be multiple parts that want to sleep, or multiple parts that want to sleep, but want to sleep for very different reasons. Could be maybe my animal wants to sleep because, because as a biological creature, I just need to recover. And there might be another part of me that wants to sleep because I'm lazy.
I tend to, and this is an area where people who don't understand the model often criticize what I'm saying before they understand it. So I just want to put this out here now, that I often focus in on the positive interpretations of things. It's not because the negative don't exist. It's because what we focus on is what we develop awareness and mastery of. So we don't ignore negativity, but we don't want to build it. We want to recognize it and learn from it and build more coherence from the lessons we've learned. So the reason I bring that in there is that if I was to call myself lazy, that might be accurate from one part of my persona, or one part of me point of view. But another part might realize, ooh, calling myself lazy, that's actually coloring that experience in a way which keeps me from seeing the beauty in it. So rather than criticizing that you use the term lazy, it's what part of your experience values that labeling of lazy, because maybe it helps you to differentiate the people who are not productive and helpful, and so you just simply don't put time aside to work with people who are lazy, for example. And it's not a judgment, but more a self-care experience. And absolutely, you're welcome to come in once we have an agreed upon set of terms that we can work coherently together with.
This is actually really great, because it's, from what I'm hearing you say, is that if I call it, there might be a part of me that is calling the other part of me lazy, or calling itself lazy with some kind of positive intent, or some kind of reason to do it. Like, it makes sense. It's not just even shame, even self-shaming or guilting, if there's such a word, should have a positive intent of some sort. And ultimately, it may not work out. It may not, the impact might not be the designed or the desired impact. But it's almost like there's always a reason for things to happen, and we can always look at these reasons with a positive intent.
Absolutely, and this is where you and I could geek out on the first layer, which is our physicality, our neurology, our patterns that are learned before the age of 3, which, interestingly enough, is before the hippocampus in the brain develops, where we can develop conscious memories that we can recall later. So most of this is developed before we have the capacity to ever have any idea that it was programmed in the first place. But point being that our attachment system, our neurology, our patterns that are set in those years can set us up to have beliefs that we don't really know where they're from. And that's actually not too important. What's important is, what was the purpose for them? What's the purpose of going, oh man, I'm such a piece of shit. Like, I've said that, I can't tell you how many times. And then I catch myself in that thought and go, yeah, part of me really believes that. And another part of me is like, you're a great dude. Like, you're capable of all these things. You're a great dad, you blah, blah, blah. But if I decide to let those parts fight with each other, it's only just going to create more resistance, and it's going to make it worse. So that example is a wonderful example, because the parts of ourselves that might be appearing to have a negative focus, there totally is a positive adaptation for it. And the root level, our neurology, our attachment systems, if you can address that and create safety within your own system, and this is where it gets really powerful, help other people to experience safety in your presence, it changes the whole game. And all the other 6 layers moving up are more fun, because it's about a connection that we're playing with, rather than how do we figure this out, which tends to be more of a survival focus, and the nervous system isn't in safety. So if we get that root layer of safety, then we can really play through the other layers rather than judge and figure out what's right.
You know, I had a few images that popped in my head. One was the sort of the symphony. You know, you got all these instruments, and there's no conductor. You know, there's no one conductor, and so they're all and because there's no conductor, they don't know how to play together, which is different than a jazz band, which is often they learn to kind of play together by doing a lot of improvisation and a lot of like listening, and not necessarily playing all the time. They sort of learn to kind of give each other space. Like good jazz musicians will do that. And then the other image that came to my head was, it's like my gang meets your gang, and you know, and now we're about to play, you know, like some kind of game like soccer or something like that, and we have to kind of, you know, we have to play well together on each side, and we have to play together well enough so that we don't hurt each other, and we can keep playing the game because it's fun.
Absolutely. I love those examples. And what came to mind as I was listening to the idea of the conductor of an orchestra versus jazz musicians who are all improvising as individuals who are differentiated but linked, right? I would say that because we can become most aware of what's within ourselves, I would say the individual experience is more like a conductor and the orchestra. Whereas the way we interact with one another, totally jazz. Because we have to take our own coherent, self-conducted experience with awareness as much as possible, and take that into imagining the other's experience so that we can meet somewhere in the middle, where we can actually have the same intention and words. Whew, I could go on and on about words, the labels we use, and we all have different associated meanings. I could quickly go on this tangent because this is an important point, that whatever you think of and feel in your body or remember, or anything that's associated with the word, let's say, cat. I say the word cat, and you might spell it out in your head. You might think of your cat. You might think of somebody else's cat. You might hear a meow in your head. You might think of the last time a cat scratched you. All of these different or you know, of course, the positive one where you're petting the cat. I have some negative experiences with cats, which is why that came up for me. I love cats when I have a great experience, but interestingly enough, allergies have had me go, oh, you know, I want to enjoy it, but I'm not enjoying it. So, so on and so forth. We have so much of a varied and diverse way of using words. We can only approximate the meaning for each other. And this gets into a whole deep conversation about consciousness. It's a subjective experience. But we need to figure out where we meet. So where's the agreed upon objectivity? And that's often met in the senses, because we experience the senses in a very similar way because we can measure them, and we can know that we measure them. We experience them in a similar way because of that measurement.
Beautiful. And are you going to tell us more about the other levels of integration? Because I'm still curious about those, and we've only done 2.
Let me distinguish. There are 9 domains of integration, and this
that's
is
what I
building
meant.
off of Dr. Dan Siegel's work, and then there are the 7 layers of human consciousness, which is the model that I've come up with. So I want to differentiate the 2 because they link very nicely when they're differentiated well. Did you mean layers of consciousness, or did you mean? We
talked about 2. You said level 1. I think you said level 1, level 2. Psychological, yes. Biological, I think.
Yes. Okay. So let's just quickly go through them, and I can go through examples of how to connect to each one. So the biological layer that is built in our attachment years when that's forming through about age 3, and there's slight variations, but it's more or less the same for the human experience. That's layer 1, and that's the framework, the neurology, the way that we're set as a starting point, which changes and develops over time, by the way. So nothing is static here. They're all adaptable and changeable, and that's the beauty of it. We're neuroplastic. We have the ability to adapt to what shows up. So that's layer 1. And layer 2, up to about age 7-ish, is where we develop our belief systems, our values, our sense of what do we do to make sense of the world and ourselves, and how we interact with other people, and all these different ways of perceiving our reality. The third layer, I find, is the most loved and hated aspect of the human experience for a number of reasons. And it's where we put our neurological framework and our beliefs, our particular filters of how we view it, into words. And this goes back to labels and how it's so varied in how we use words. So we've come up with disciplines, sciences, to organize those words and use them in a very specific way. And this is where we distinguish and learn about different topics about life, ourselves, other people, about biology, about, psychology, or whatever, music.
What's it called?
The third layer? Funny enough, I don't have specific names for them, but I would say it is linguistics.
Okay, for me, it occurred as abstraction. We're talking about things versus feeling them directly.
So the words themselves are not abstract in that we intend for a concrete meaning. Right.
But the words themselves are an abstraction of something else.
Totally.
That's how it occurred to me.
I gotcha. And technically, I think that would work well for the layperson. I think, not to undersell anyone's intelligence, but for simplicity's sake, I would say words, labels, communication in a general way is helpful, because the label can get the system can get complex. We want to keep it simple so that we can apply it well. Because if we don't get a sense of understanding of it in the moment, we'll either go into fight or flight mode, and that's basically anxiety, like, oh, I'm not sure if I understand it. Oh, well, I'll just try this. Or maybe they'll ignore that I don't know what I'm talking about if I pretend this. It gets into all sorts of fun conversations about where we can go with it. So layer 1 are neurology. It's basically the physical level. Layer 2, the psychology, essentially, how we view the world. Layer 3, how we put it into words. And layer 4, you might notice this correlates with the chakras. This is a fun topic that we could go into another time, but just as a side note. So the 4th layer, notice I'm pointing to the heart, is the layer of needs and feelings, the human commonalities we all share. Definitely more abstract than what we can measure in our physical bodies, or maybe take a test on psychologically in the 3rd layer, or articulate with the 3rd layer. The 4th layer is a feeling layer. Mm-hmm. And that's why the embodied experience is so important for connection. If you have any experience with nonviolent communication, the intention is to connect with the need that someone has that they may be talking about in a different way, or they're very upset, right? Mm-hmm. But when you connect to the need, there's a sense, oh, this person actually cares about what's going on for me, my pain, so I don't need to defend. Mm. That 4th layer can be really valuable for connecting to people in a human way. And so it's an expanded identity beyond our tribe, which tends to be down in the first 3 layers in my experience. Mm. So the 4th is where we start to expand out of that, and we can connect to a greater experience of our human capacities to connect to one another, to feel, to need, and to meet those needs for ourselves and for other people, relationships, right? Mm. The 5th layer is about individual mastery. And when, let's say I got a PhD in linguistics, or in jazz musicianship, or relationship coaching, this specific expertise is something that needs to be built over a long period of time with experience, and it works well, but usually in a specific context, right? So The fifth layer is important for our own personal development,
Hmm.
but it's only as useful as it can serve and give value to others, because we're a part of a bigger system, right?
Hmm.
And this is where the sixth layer comes in, because the sixth layer connects all the level 5 system mastery and shows how they can collaborate as one. And so that's where holistic thinking emerges.
Hmm.
Idea of seeing the systems. Yeah.
I want to say something really quick about level 5. Is it seems like if level 4 is about our own personal needs, emerging feelings and needs, feelings and the needs that are under that sort of inside or underneath the feelings. It seems like layer 5 is about developing ways to meet these needs or to meet
Absolutely.
the needs of others.
Well said. Yes. So, for example, when you're a coach in a specific area, you're an expert in helping people meet needs or learning to develop the capacity to meet those needs in a specific way that's more masterful than they did before. And then the collaboration of all of these, let's say, coaches or members of a team, like on a football team, they've worked their whole lives to develop their individual masteries, but they have differentiated jobs that are collaboratively linked. And when they can collaborate coherently and really honor the differences and link in a way that utilizes everyone's strengths, we are then an emergent system. Emergent being more than the sum of the parts.
Right.
Kind of like if you try and take a molecule out of a, an atom out of a molecule of water, just one hydrogen or an oxygen, it's a totally different thing. It's not water anymore. And then you take one water molecule separate, and you separate them all. Well, you don't have water. But when you put them all together, eventually you have a cup of water, or the systems in the body that incorporate water, or rivers, lakes, oceans, and then you get the whole ecosystem flowing. And so these emergent properties are not possible without this differentiation and linkage and integration. And that's the whole point, which brings us to layer 7. Layer 7 is the integrated and embodied experience of being a part of that whole system.
Unity.
Yes, while honoring everyone else's piece. So it's I would say it's almost labelless, but it's embodied in action that serves the self and the whole in the most coherent way.
I have a name for it. I call it grace.
Yes.
It's like it's not just a bunch of dancers dancing together, dancing on their own. Then there's the dancers learning to dance well, and then layer 6 to integrate together, and then layer 7 is just you see the whole there's a whole system, hopefully operating optimally, or at least working towards that.
Beautiful, beautifully said. It's the experience of going to see, let's say, the Nutcracker. It's around the holidays, right?
Yes.
And you see all the layer 5 mastery going on and how they collaborate together as a layer 6 system, and the experience of watching it. And sometimes you have the experience of, just so beautiful. That encapsulates 7.
Related to that, I went to see a show a few years ago in San Francisco. It was called Burn the Floor. And it's a dance show. It's something anywhere between 15 and 25. I don't recall. I'm sure somebody could just YouTube search it. And they were dancing to popular songs, extremely fast, extremely well, extremely coordinated. And it was amazing to witness the integrated oneness of it. And I still remember it to this day. I mean, it was mind-blowing how well they could come together, move at the same time exactly, but sometimes move differently in ways that were collaborative. And I often use this in my explanation of connection. Sometimes connection is imitation, and sometimes connection is a call and response. So you could look at a group as a troupe dancing and not doing the same movements, but doing movements that are collaboratively contributing to the dance. And sometimes they're all moved together at once. And so there's both patterns emerging, and you can see that they're both contributing to the overall system.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you use that phrasing, by the way, of the patterns that are emerging.
Mhm.
So when I say emergent properties, well, that's what we're talking about, the patterns that emerge from a coherent system.
Mhm.
Dan Siegel has an acronym he uses to describe a system or a person or relationship or whatever that is coherent.
Mhm.
Faces. It's flexible, it's adaptive,
Mhm.
coherent, energized, and stable.
Mm.
Faces. Flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. And so you get a sense of sustainability. You get a sense of this is enriching my life experience to be present in this moment
Mhm.
with this collaborative, coherent, faces flow, he calls it, system.
Mm. From an attachment theory standpoint, this sounds like a secure individual, somebody who can generate all of those five things. Sounds like a very secure person. So they can roll with anything. They're very adaptive. They can change. And there's also some self-reflectiveness, which I'm not sure if you mentioned as one of the points, but there's the ability to receive feedback and kind of incorporate it in order for the system to continue to emerge and evolve in a stable way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the relational dynamics, he actually has another acronym. He describes specifically the therapy, but by the way, his discipline is in being an attachment research scientist.
Mhm.
So that's definitely where this emergent acronym came from.
Yeah.
But the concept relationally that he uses between a therapist and the client, or even in a relationship, intimate relationship or friendship or family, is part presence, and which he defines as being aware of what's happening in terms of sensing the experience as it's happening.
Mhm.
A, for attuning to the other person and what their emotional experiences is. So it's like this honing in on, okay, what are they feeling? What are they needing, right? And so PAR, resonance or empathic resonance, you're feeling with them.
Mm.
It's the experience of not just attuning to it, but being in that experience. What's it like to be in their shoes? Like an empathic understanding or an empathic resonance is really like, he talks about strings that are resonant. They vibrate together in a chord. So that's where the connection is established, and then it results in T, trust, which is the foundation for secure attachment. That's secure, stable, safe. PART, presence, attunement, resonance, and trust.
This actually connects really well with my work on consent, and in my exposition around consent and teaching consent classes, what's come up is this very, very simple equation that I've been using, and sort of like trying to apply it to just about everything I see out there, just to see if it still fits. Because for me, part of integrating my ideas is to figure out, are these ways that I'm trying to simplify what I perceive still applying out there in the real world? Because there's a way that you can just use a model that, what was that? I was just watching a video, and the guy in it, he's a neuroscientist. He said all models are wrong, but they can be useful. And
Yes.
so I think
Yes.
that's, it's like you could be hearing these acronyms. You can be like, yeah, but it doesn't apply all the time, and that's true. At the same time, as human beings, we can't absorb all the information, and so we have to simplify the things that come at us as much, in a way that allows us to engage with it. Otherwise we just get overloaded, or we just turn away from it. And so the equation looks like this. Connection leads to trust, and trust leads to consent. And by connection, I mean the ability to engage in ways where that but you don't know, where moment to moment you're connecting at multiple levels, either through ideas, as we're doing right now, or even in body language, where I smile, or I say something, or I nod my head and you nod your head. There's imitation, there's call and response, and I think some of the PART speaks to that. And so a lot of that is connection from where I'm sitting. and if you can connect it at multiple levels, emotionally, socially, primally, intellectually, and a few others that I work with, then that leads to trust. And by trust, what I mean is knowing right now in this moment that in the next moment there's going to be another moment of connection. And and the more you do this with someone, the more you engage with someone, the more you start to trust. And then that trust is, oh, well, I know that next second or the next 5 minutes or the next hour of us talking is still going to be awesome because we're going to continue connecting. So it's the belief that connection will continue to happen. That's what I call trust. And then beyond that, there's this sort of this thing called consent, or I call sovereign consent. And by that, I mean the willingness to check out the next moment, because now that I feel connected and I'm trusting the next moment is going to be awesome, and it's going to be another moment of connection, that I want to do that because it's great and it feels good. It's fulfilling in different ways that could be different for different people. But the point is that it's going to be great, so I want that. So my authentic consent or sovereign consent is I want to go in that direction because I trust it's going to be awesome, because I know there's going to be more connection.
I love it. I'm having in my mind the jazz musicians improvising in the moment and going, okay, my inner conductor is taking all the level 5 mastery within me, and it's contributing as this musician, and I can see this other level 5 musician, and we're connecting together in this system. And it's messy sometimes, like, oh, did we fall off? Okay, let's bring it back in. And the mastery is learning to actually ride the wave rather than when we fall off go, oh, it's over, it sucks, oh, there'll never be trusted connection again, and recognizing that the falling in love with uncertainty. I think you mentioned this in your last talk about defining spirituality,
yes,
as gracefully embracing uncertainty, something along those lines.
Yeah, I call it spiritual intelligence. So to me, spiritual intelligence is our relationship to the unknown and to chaos. And if we don't have a good relationship to the unknown or chaos or spirit or the mystery, then whenever something happens that wasn't meant to be, then we're gonna resist it, and we're gonna feel a lot of pain and suffering. And so, and you see a lot of spiritual traditions are about dancing, the dance of Leela, and the recognition that life is suffering, not as a way to be bummed out by it, but as a way to know that whenever suffering occurs, it's par for the course. And I'm not talking about bypassing. I'm talking about fully receiving the suffering as par for the course. That doesn't mean it's okay. None in that way. Doesn't mean that somebody harming us is okay. It just means that we recognize that we are part of a system that sometimes goes haywire, or sometimes or people doing the best they can, and their best is really not that great, and sometimes downright awful and harmful. And to be able to recognize that having enough distance or having enough of a surrender into it, we can actually receive it as such and say, okay, well, what can I add to the system? What kind of resources can I bring in, or what kind of help can I get in order to reestablish a system that's viable, and an engagement that's flourishing and alive.
Yeah, and integrated, right? Coherent, right. With a faces flow.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. One of the most useful areas that I found to apply an awareness of the 7 layers is to examples like you were referencing just there about the possibility of interpreting what you were saying as spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
That would be a layer 3 label that someone is committed to a meaning of the words you're using that's not what you're intending. And to be integrated in a conversation is to be flexible enough in the faces flow and adaptive to recognize that coherence doesn't look like the exact way we want to speak and understand things. It's going to require stepping out of our individual experience and trying to feel into the other, so that we can connect to the energy that's available in that faces flow and become more stable, not because we're rigid, but because we can dance in this experience of, oh, I wonder if that's what you mean. And this brings me back to that concept of how I focus in on the positive interpretation, not to ignore the negative, as maybe another example of spiritual bypassing as a misinterpretation, but to go, okay, so what is the adaptation of my nervous system, for example, to shut someone out? When I was 1 year old and I had a whole month, let's say, where my mother had to work. I don't know if that happened, but it's very possible. And that would technically, because of the lack of connection there where my brain was developing, be considered neurological neglect, not as a judgment on my mother. She had to do what she had to do. But during that critical brain development period, that would result in an adaptation that was useful at the time. Otherwise, it would be overwhelming, and I would have been unable to cope. So in order to not go insane, I learned to tune out.
Yep.
And when people do that, other people may take it personally. And this is where we need to apply a whole 7-layer holistic thinking approach to ourselves whenever we're self-critical, or to when we're critical of others. There's always a positive interpretation that will bring value to both people. If we're willing to step back and go toward a faces flow, which in the moment might be expressing, I feel hurt that you just tuned out right there. You know, and learning to navigate when someone's hurt. Sometimes that's unbearable for people to know that the other person's hurt. They'll go, oh no, you're fine.
Or because of us that they're hurt. That could be even more difficult.
Oh, absolutely.
I wanted to say something really quick about the bypassing, because well, yeah, on one hand there's the perspective that somebody else is bypassing, so that's its own judgment and own interpretation. But I think it's also possible that people are bypassing, and I see that as a form of suppression. You know, you basically use whatever technique you have at your disposal to handle whatever's coming your way, and in some cases you might believe that you're actually integrating it, like everything happens for a reason, right? If you have what it takes to take it as everything happens for a reason and roll with it in a faces kind of a flow, then fuck yeah. But what if somebody uses everything happens for a reason, but for a different reason? They use it as a way to not feel or not fully engage with the experience because they can't. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's done for a positive reason. That's the best they can do. But somebody else might turn around and say, oh, you're just spiritually bypassing, which is minimizing this person's experience of doing their.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the effect can be such that our interpretation is absolutely correct of somebody else as far as how it affects us. But it doesn't mean we know what they meant. Oh, yeah. And it doesn't excuse, you know, the idea that if someone's affecting us negatively or we're affecting someone else negatively, the boundaries need to be placed. That's important. And if we're just missing each other, that's okay, and we can put up boundaries. But the idea that we think we know what the other person is intending, or that they must be doing it to hurt us on purpose, there may be some truth in rare occasions, but the human experience is to meet needs. And if we don't meet our survival needs, we're going to be dog eat dog, claw to survive, like we're drowning. You know, somebody's drowning and they're clawing at the lifeguard to try and live. They're not aware that they're doing that. And we have all these different levels of that happening. It doesn't make it okay that the person unconsciously clawed at the lifeguard, especially if it brought the lifeguard down too. But we also need to recognize that this is the human experience, and we're going to unconsciously hurt ourselves and other people all the time.
Yeah, it seems very difficult, especially in this age of Me Too, of women, mostly women. I mean, there's men too, for that matter. It's not just reserved to women. But in this age of Me Too, where women come out and say, this person harmed me, and there's truth to that. And there's also truth to this person, quite possibly doing the best they can. But that also brings up the question of sociopaths, or people who are essentially, I personally think it's a little too easy to say this person is a monster until we really find out what's going on for them. But at the same time, there's a reality of harm, regardless of how it occurred, even if the other person did the best they could.
This is where I see the value of social standards, and law.
Yeah.
The law is anything but perfect. We all see examples of this. And if it wasn't in place, if certain people who are hurt, let's take the compassionate angle. They're hurting, and that's why they're stealing and robbing and murdering. That's not okay that's happening. We still need to uphold boundaries, and we need to do whatever we can to prevent people who are probably in such a painful survival-like place that they're hurting people. We can't excuse that. But at the same time, to take someone who is in that space of hurting others in a perpetual way where they just keep doing it and doing it, it's not helping their life get better. They're going to go to jail. Mm-hmm. They're going to push people away from them. Hurting others is not a beneficial way to be. Mm-hmm. So we do need to do whatever we can to prevent it. And this is an important distinction. But to demonize the person rather than the behavior is, I think, where we miss the human compassion that could take us in another direction. It's not to excuse the behavior. It's to recognize that there's a human being mm-hmm. with needs that may or may not be being met. And because of that complex experience within them, we need to be able to see the moment as it is and uphold the boundaries we need. Mm-hmm. And to recognize that it doesn't mean they're evil.
Yeah.
That's a level 3 and down conversation when we say some people are good, some people are bad. Speaking of bypassing, it's an adaptation because it's terrifying that there's uncertainty in the world. But that is a layer 3 down conversation without any acknowledgement that there is a common human needs, commonalities of needs and feelings, that we can develop certain masteries that might be different, that might be offensive for some people or helpful in others. Oh, that's a good person because he's helpful. No, just to us. It's relative. And I could go on and on, but you get my point.
Yeah, and this reminds me I'm looking at the culture, the American culture. I'm from Canada, so it's not that much old. It's really not that much older, maybe a tiny bit, but not really to matter. And noticing how a culture like the American culture is still occurs as very young, very very immature. Like it's only a few hundred years old, and you go to other cultures who've been around for thousands of years. They're at a different stage, and there's different issues that surround that. But I think with the American culture and the media and the culture itself, looking at things in a much less nuanced way, it feels like. And then you look at movies and there's good guys and bad guys, and every once in a while you see, especially as we become more culturally savvy and as we get more connected to the rest of the world, there's more and more of a sense of, okay, that's a little bit more nuanced. But then you look at some Japanese animations, and even the most bad person is actually, unless they're demons, that's a different thing. But if they're human, and even if they're demons, in some cases, there's a nuance. Even their badness is actually has a purpose. There's a reason for it, and when you understand it, and often you see that in as part of the resolution of the movie, is you understand why the bad guy was the bad guy, and why it makes sense now. And I noticed that, and that could just be me, but there's a sense of a little bit of a difference in perspective culturally.
Oh, absolutely. To briefly, I don't like to go into the realm of politics and religion, but we could touch on it briefly here as an example. So any fundamental religion, it doesn't matter whether it's Islam or Christian or Jewish or whatever, the idea that it's a very rigid right, wrong, good, bad, this is the way, or you're not going to heaven, for example, or,
we should kill you because you don't believe the same thing we do.
Yes. It essentially, because it lacks sophistication beyond the third layer. Now, everyone within that system, of course, has a heart, and we all have, needs and feelings, and they may acknowledge within that system that there's a common humanity. But anyone outside of that, their tribal brain is alerted, and then they get all calm and coherent. I do this. This is the hand model of the brain. And when the primal parts are survival and making meaning of things is too powerful, the bottom-up signals, it blows our top of the cerebral cortex that could keep us rational and capable of learning and empathy and thinking ahead and really considering another's perspective and taking care of ourselves. I mean, all of those things, right? So my point being that the fundamentalist way of viewing things is an adaptation to feel safe, to feel certainty. And so it's not wrong. It just has a lot of limitations because it doesn't include all of humanity. It only includes those who are chosen or whatever, right? Whatever their specific belief is.
Privilege.
So, yeah. It's the sense of, well, some people are better than others. Oh, that's just a good person or a bad person. You know, there's a certain layer of human development that fits into, and it's adolescent and below. There's no complexity beyond that. And sometimes when people aren't enough, I'm not calling them immature and adolescent per se. I'm saying that they've chosen to limit their thinking to not include more than just the people who are like them, in a sense. And there are many fundamentalist people who are very loving, and I'm not trying to box people, but the intention here is to look at, so where does the thinking take us? What's the result? Does it result in different groups fighting and perpetuating lack of safety in our layer one? Well, you know you're going to get more violence if that's what's going on. If we're seeking to understand, if we're seeking to cultivate safety in ourselves and others that are different, we're honoring differences and promoting linkages, that's integration. And it's a more coherent 7-layer human full experience that we can go, I see something in that person that I've never seen in another human being. And maybe that I thought they were my enemy before when my top was blown. But when we can get our cortex online, we can start to perceive these things and learn what's safe that may be outside of our comfort zone. And these, getting back to what I teach, these are the practices that I teach. It's not so intellectual. We've had a lot of intellectual concepts in this conversation. They're the embodied, mostly first layer experience of, if we're to look at the hand model of the brain, the top down is, okay, let's filter life to see it in a specific way that's useful. Maybe it's useful for a particular tribe or religion or political party or whatever. But it's useful just for that way of viewing it. But at any point, we can upgrade this experience by seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, the experience that's happening now. That's presence. And so the practices all encourage presence of what's actually happening rather than what we anticipate. Otherwise, we project with our top-down models something that isn't happening, and we believe that what we think is going to happen has happened, and we find the justification for why we're right.
Yeah, confirmation bias.
Yeah, confirmation bias. You got it.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground, and what I'm realizing is we had planned to go into an exercise, and I would suggest that we stop for this point and take it a little bit even more slower than we had expected, and go into the experience on the next video, and
That's a great
this
idea.
will allow people to just kind of integrate that piece, so to speak. Be able to kind of sit with it for a little while, and maybe in the next video, whether it's next, which is going to be next week, they'll be able to sort of like have that under their belt and have had a chance to think about it, and maybe have conversations with friends about how that shows up in their life. And then, what do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea. I would just wrap that concept up in that there were a lot of specific layer 3 topics that we talked about. And I'd like to open up a brief metaphor about the experience of learning in the human experience. Imagine that any one concept we learn about, layer 3 are words, and we create associations with our senses. That's a more complex topic we can talk about later. As we do that, think about that as, okay, well, they're black and white concepts, right? And we look at those black and white concepts and we compare them and go, okay, that's darker, that's lighter. Okay, I think I get what that concept means. And that's just a very general metaphor for one topic. Now take that one, let's say it's the size of a quarter, and you put it on the wall and glue it there, right? And then you take your next black and white concept and go, okay, well, I see the differences. Okay, I see how maybe they might be related, that they're in the same place, even though they look very different. Okay, cool. I understand that concept. put that quarter next to the other one. Oh, the quarters are different shades.
Mm.
I thought there was black and white only, but that's only when I'm looking at one part of a layer 3 conversation, which is where all misunderstandings happen. Shades of gray is a more complex, more sophisticated way of looking at the world than our own perspective in the moment. And so by allowing that perspective from a bottom-up experience, which is what we'll go into with the exercise next time, our sensations, 5 senses outside of us and internally, the sensations we get, it gives us the tools to distinguish what our minds might want us to project for certainty. To pretend is there, in a sense. We pretend all the time. We just don't know we're doing it. And to relate to others in a way where we're really embodied. We're able to connect to ourselves fully in this moment. Take a breath. Man, I could use another breath. And just notice that slowing down. If everyone wants to take a breath with me for a moment. Maybe one more. And through that experience, how have your senses become more attuned and clear in your awareness right now? Can you feel your butt in the chair, your feet on the floor? This is the experience now. This is the bottom-up experience that allows us to go, we went into a lot of top-down concepts. What's my body feeling like right now? Do I feel good? Is that a coherent experience? And if any of the concepts we talked about had you hold your breath unconsciously, which you'll probably be more aware of now that you were breathing in that couple breaths there, that's probably because of a level 3 misunderstanding. Just a specific label where you might have gone, ooh, I don't agree with that. Well, it's a specific area, and we can distinguish that later. But that is an endless unpacking that is the human experience of communication and connecting.
And that's the reason why we have these conversations, because because we get to unpack all of this meaning and all these different shades and these nuances that then later on, including the practices to actually clear out a lot of the stuff, so there's not so much of it assaulting us all the time, allows us to make better sense of the world. And from where I'm sitting, allows us to make better choices for ourselves and for each other in a dance, in a symphony of multiple parts inside of us as we're integrating them, but also as a system that we're trying to create that's graceful and well orchestrated.
Yes, absolutely. And to briefly touch on, okay, if we're safe in layer 1 and in layer 2, it's like the map of the world that my top-down experience filters and creates some certainty. How accurate is that map? Now, it might have been very accurate as a 1-year-old when I needed to tune people out, but it's not so helpful when I'm trying to connect with an adult now, or my son or my daughter, or the love of my life, Danielle. Like, if I use that adaptation that was from that old map, it's probably not going to work out well. And it was adaptive at the time. But learning to upgrade our maps is the thing we can do. Internally, it's always changing. And that allows us to really know what our experience is. What's the map that works best for me so that I can fully attune and connect to another? And we can create coherence together. And as I don't know if anyone who's listening is familiar with Dr. David Hawkins, his book, Power versus Force. He talks about the energetic vibration of the emotional experience, from shame down at the bottom all the way up through what you might call enlightenment. And the higher the vibration collectively, it's not, you're one or the other, the more you feel connected to everyone as a unified, coherent whole. And so if you're around an enlightened being, so they say, it transforms you because of their resonance. It resonates with yours and it changes you forever. Think of all the times someone has made an impact in your life. They really saw into you and they made a difference by being present for you in a way where you go, I'll never forget what he said when I most needed it in that one moment, when I was really down. That is a change in resonance that changed my map. I'm speaking specifically, I'm remembering a wrestling coach who was a father figure for me when my father wasn't available. And it was a very painful time. but I'll never forget how that changed my map and how I want to serve others in the way that he helped me. And that's what we do with this process. Thank you.
That's amazing. Beautiful. I think this is a good point for us to stop. I really appreciate all your sharing. It's always amazing to have conversations with you. And I'm so happy that we're capturing this.
Likewise.
So that people can be a fly on the wall or just with us as we explore these really incredible topics and learn to play together and learn to dance together as a brand new friendship.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure, Philippe. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And if you're watching this, that's because we've put this on YouTube. And please click subscribe so you get to see more of these conversations that Mike and I are going to have. And I'll be inviting other new, really amazing guests, people like emergent thinkers, emergent badasses who know a few things that I barely know so much better, and so this allows me to learn on the fly, and allows you to learn just as well. So this is Exquisite Love Coaching channel, and I hope you'll see us again next week. And then I put this over just so I know when I'm editing the video here at the end of this piece. And then I can just stop this.